What's up, narrators? It's me, it's Mo. We are back with the Narrators Per Possession podcast. And today we're doing something new for the first time ever. Today, I am flying solo with the pod, no guests today. We're going to do a mailbag episode today. And I'm excited to answer questions and really just, big thing we're about at Narrators Per Possession. We want to connect NBA fans, basketball fans across the world to better basketball narrators, and there's no better way to do that than for me to take your questions and get some thoughts, hopefully inspire some conversation. Hope everyone's doing great today. We are a basketball podcast, but I can't deny that here in the U.S. we are sort of in the post-game processing of the first week of NFL football. I have nothing pleasurable to say about NFL football. I live in New York. Giants and Jets lost, as I recall. I know the Jets lost for a fact. I watched that game. I usually don't watch Giants games. I grew up on Chicago sports. I'm also a Bears fan. So again, just bad stuff all around football wise. I do want to shout out though Justin Fields. He balled. Those little things bit the Jets in the butt. And then the Bears just what can I say? Like, I'm not going to dig too much into that. There are plenty of great Chicago Bears content people out there that breaking that down, I'm sure. I would just say from my own point of view, I want to be unreasonably optimistic about the Bears because I believe in the talents of Caleb Williams for what I've seen so far in this game. Certain things he needs to work on. Again, other people can talk about that. And I like the scheme of the new head coach, Ben Johnson. I just, lost a tough one in the sense that you start out strong, but you didn't finish. Got to play 4 quarters of football. That much I know from the game. So, enough football talk. We're going to get into mailbag questions. And before I do that, one thing I also do want to touch on, we had the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame induction over the weekend. I want to give a shout out to Carmelo Anthony. And the reason why I want to give a shout out and congratulations on an illustrious career by Carmelo Anthony, notably for his time in the New York Knicks, but he started with the Denver Nuggets and made other stops. I just think an all-around great basketball player. And I have it's one of the few small degrees of separation I have. I actually met Carmelo Anthony once as one of these kind of random New York stories. I live in New York City. I was in LaGuardia Airport for a flight. And this was not too long after he had retired. I'm sitting in LaGuardia waiting for the board a flight, and then all of a sudden, like, Carmelo just walks in, no people, no handlers, no nothing. And I think it's just a testament, just right off the bat, like, he is a real down-to-earth guy. And the funny thing I had come to realize in this experience, like, I was on the same flight as Carmelo Anthony going somewhere. And then even more funny, I ended up sitting right behind him. And the thing, I try not to get too fanish about it or blow up his spot. When I board the flight, he's already sitting down. I dab him up. I congratulate him on his retirement. And I told him that I really wanted the Chicago Bulls to sign him in his final season. And then he just laughed at me. But that's my short couple of 15 minutes of like Carmelo Anthony experience. So let's get into the mailbag. I'm excited to get into these questions. And before we get into those questions, I want to just quickly plug. We obviously do this podcast here on YouTube, but what we have also is a Patreon community. And I usually flash this at the end of the show, but I'll bring it up top first. If you like what we're doing in this podcast, I really encourage you, please join our Patreon community as well, where there's also written content and we post a lot of interesting video content as well that isn't just this podcast, but really trying to build up a cool basketball-focused content community there. So please, if you like what we're doing here, join the Narratives Per Possession Patreon community, because that's how you will be able to submit questions that I will read like I'm about to do in a few minutes here, to just talk about what's going on in NBA basketball or basketball in general. I continue to focus initially here on the NBA, but love to grow and learn more about the game from other aspects. Like we had a great episode with Lucas Kaplan, who covers the Brooklyn Nets, and that was the first opportunity for me to actually have an informed conversation about WNBA basketball. So definitely join the Patreon. And while we're at it, also, as you watch this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment as well, because we want to continue to grow this YouTube channel as well. So let me bring up our first mailbag question, and it's a great one. First question here. It is from a great friend of the podcast, great friend of everything we're doing in Narratives Per Possession. Is from Josh Earl. He contributes to Center Hub, the Center Hub, which is, they do great work covering college basketball and also I mean just a wide array of basketball content there. Josh asks, how do you think the newly hired head coaches, and I'm assuming NBA head coaches, will look to optimize their teams? And I would fill in the blanks and assume again for this upcoming season that will kick off shortly. We're like a few weeks away from we're a few weeks away from media day, and then shortly after that, I'm sure the NBA teams will go into the training camps, and we'll, September 9th today. In about less than a month or so, we should be hitting preseason ball. So how do I think the newly hired NBA head coaches will look to optimize their teams? So I think it's important. So we should think about like what were the coaching changes that happened this offseason, and where are we looking in terms of new head coaches coming into the league. Two coaches I'm going to exclude from this question, answering this question. I'm going to exclude Mitch Johnson and Doug Christie, right? So they had more or less, but in my opinion, I think they had a season to really demonstrate like what they're doing with those teams. They, it, and I contrast that from, let's start with the first coach I will talk about in terms of like, what am I expecting from this coach coming up? Let's talk about David Adelman with the Denver Nuggets. If I recall correctly, he replaced Mike Malone in a very shocking fashion with like a week or two left in the NBA regular season, the 24-25 NBA regular season. And surprisingly, to his credit, the Nuggets, it wasn't complete chaos when they got to the playoffs. And Optimum Podcasting, let me look at how they finished the playoffs, right? Because you would have thought just not only Mike Malone being replaced with David Adelman, but the whole front office also being replaced. Calvin Booth gets fired. Real interesting season. I think there's definitely, to use Josh's phrase, there's optimization to be done this season, because they fought through a tough first round series against the Clippers. Go 7 games, defeat the Clippers, go with another 7 games, and honestly, it maybe it was like a healthy Aaron Gordon set of legs away from actually pulling off the upset, and maybe we don't get the world champion Oklahoma City Thunder. Maybe it is potentially like a Cinderella run for the Denver Nuggets where they get back to the NBA Finals. But they get 2 series under their belt in the playoffs despite David Adelman coming in. And I thought, and it isn't surprising, David Adelman, he wasn't like off the street or anything. He was an assistant, and so there's some continuity there. The things I'm thinking about, based on thinking about those 2 series that the Nuggets had in the 25 playoffs and going into this upcoming season, 25-26, the first thing that really comes to mind to me is what are going to be the defensive principles for the Denver Nuggets? And there's 2 points that I touch on as a backdrop to that. If you think back to that second round against the Oklahoma City Thunder, they really leaned on a lot of zone defense throughout that series. And this is just my own opinion. I'd love to hear other people's opinions about this. I think people When you see a team like the Denver Nuggets really leaning on zone defense the way they did, it calls into question to me, like, do they have people that they trust at the point of attack yet? My guess would be no, not yet. And I wrote about this over the summer in our Narratives Per Possession weekly newsletter. Actually, in the 24-25 season, they're frankly not rated well in any of the defensive metrics if you were to go clean the glass. They're bottom rated in defensive rating, bottom rated in, defensive effective field goal, and bottom rated in defensive turnover percentage. So the defense already had some issues. I think that, like, I'd be shocked if that isn't a point of emphasis and something that David Adelman has been focusing in the offseason and would like to carry into this upcoming preseason, because there's also a number of offseason sort of restocking of the cupboards for the roster that the Nuggets made, and going out and getting a return of Bruce Brown to their roster. He was heavy contributor in their title team, the 23 title team, and they go and trade Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson, and then also bring in Tim Hardaway Jr. So they're bolstering their wing depth, and really, I mean, in a lot of ways, you can consider Bruce Brown a wingish type player as well. He really is like that Swiss Army knife. So there's a few layers of the optimization for the Denver Nuggets that David Adelman needs to, in my opinion, focus on for this upcoming season. We just talked about the defensive principles. Leaned on a lot of zone. Is that really something that you want to continue? I would expect it. They need to find a way to have a much more sturdy point of attack on the perimeter with their defense, their on-ball defense. You bring in, good depth vets in Johnson and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown. Just figuring out their roles and figuring out how they look and how they fit into the rotation. And I think the counterpoint to that as well is, now that you have, specifically with Cam Johnson and Tim Hardaway Jr., now a little bit more offensive juice than what they had last season. Let's go back to the playoffs, right, for the Denver Nuggets. Their bench rotation was effectively Russell Westbrook and Peyton Watson, right? Real tight 7-man rotation, and I think that was a big factor in how the playoffs ended for the Denver Nuggets as well. They just need more depth. I mean, I think if anything, the finals matchup of both the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers proved that depth is becoming now this new point of emphasis in the way rosters are constructed, and in the way title contending rosters are being constructed, where you really do need that depth. Because of just style of play changes. We're in a faster pace NBA now. The physicality is increasing, and we'll touch on that actually in the second question. These are the things that, I think those have to be things that David Adelman is thinking about in terms of optimizing his 25-26 Nuggets roster. And where I was going with that is, I wouldn't be surprised if there's now, with this, with the addition of the vets, perhaps you see a scaling back of Jamal Murray's offensive load, at least earlier in the regular season, because injuries and availability has always been, it seems like a perennial problem for Jamal Murray. So you certainly want to preserve him, because he matters the most when the Nuggets are playing in April and May, probably not so much in November and December. And those three layers of optimization: the defense, bring in these new vets this offseason, optimizing Jamal Murray's workload, but then also you have the younger guys that apparently that was a point of contention with Mike Malone and Calvin Booth, is playing the Christian Brauns, the Peyton Watsons, the Julian Strouthers. Christian Braun, of those three, probably had the most run with in terms of rotational minutes. But I do question, I think that's an open question for me, is how much contribution, how much impact can you expect from Peyton Watson and Julian Strouthers going into this new season, now that you have more vets in the mix? I think those are the things I'm thinking about when it comes to first David Adelman and the Denver Nuggets. Now, before I get to the next coach, I do want to shout, hey, big shout out to Neil C Red UK. He's actually spoiler alert, he's behind our next question, but I encourage everybody to follow Neil at C Red UK, especially all you Chicago Bulls fans. If you're a Bulls fan in the UK or anywhere in the world, Neil's a great friend of everything I've done here. Great friend of all my content. Please follow him. He's great. So what we talked about the Denver Nuggets. Next coach I want to talk about this, new coach coming in and actually, a similar situation where he replaced his predecessor late in the 24-25 regular season is Tuomas Iisalo, head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies. When I'm, as I think about the Grizzlies and how they finished their season, that first round exit against Oklahoma City, it was, from a Grizzly standpoint, certainly not their best sort of outing, and they just looked outmatched. There's just no other way to put it. I would suspect that there's a lot of work that I'm just going to call it Tuomas because I'll mangle his last name. I know got to work with that one or work on that one. The things I do know about him in terms of just his reputation and from what I've seen, at least when I watched Grizzlies games last season or this past season, it is a transition, pun intended, from perhaps the point of emphasis that Taylor Jenkins had the Memphis Grizzlies, where Tuomas Iisalo, he offensively speaking, he is as hyper focused on the transition game as you might see from an NBA head coach. And he came from Eurobasket or the Euro leagues, and that was a strong principle for him, is really establishing his offense and leading his offense with his transition attack and being organized in the transition game. So I would expect that he wants to continue emphasizing that. Frankly, I don't know if the Memphis Grizzlies have the roster yet to fully realize a transition first sort of focus in terms of offense. And I'll say, the player that I will have a lot of questions about, frankly, and is a personal sort of awareness that I have about this player as well, is Zach Edey. Firstly, he needs to be healthy, but I'm a Purdue alum, and I watch all 4 years of Zach Edey's career at Purdue. I think he's growing as an NBA player for sure. He's not the first player I think of when you think about transition game, running. That's not to say he can't do it. I would question how much contribution he'll be able to make in terms of the transition principles that Iisalo wants to run with the Grizzlies. And frankly, also Ja Morant. From what I can tell from Iisalo's offense, he's much more emphasizing transition game. And also, when they do get in half court, it's very much about off-ball screening, cuts and movements. A lot of activity happening off-ball versus sort of like what is kind of like the league standard of just ball screen, pick and roll, and two-man game. Maybe you have a third man in that pick and roll game, and just try to find advantages out of that. I can tell with Iisalo, his offense is very much about just quick pace, just moving, either player movement or ball movement to get to his advantages and get to his desired shots. So that's a big thing. And then I also know he has a reputation for just on the defensive side, really leaning heavily on aggressive pick and roll coverages. So a lot of hedging, a lot of just pressuring the ball at the point of attack or picking up aggressively. So that also is a big question. But then when you think about the move they made, trading Desmond Bane for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope from the Orlando Magic, that might be a move that is really working on giving Iisalo more of the roster that he needs. At least it's a starting point. I don't think that's the only move they should make. If again, they want to be aggressive in pick and roll defensive coverage, but they also want to move the ball fast and want to get up the court with pace and speed. I just think there's a lot more roster tweaks there on the way for the Memphis Grizzlies. So we talked about the Nuggets. We talked about with David Adelman. We talked about Tuomas Iisalo. with the Memphis Grizzlies. Next team with a new head coach, right? The Phoenix Suns are coming in with Jordan Ott. And Jordan Ott, from the background I've learned about him, has a lot of history with Cleveland Cavaliers head coach Kenny Atkinson. First was an assistant with Atkinson when Atkinson was the head coach with the Brooklyn Nets, and actually reunited with him for a stint on the Cleveland Cavaliers coaching staff as well this past season. So I think it's different for Jordan Knott compared to, I think in terms of optimization focus, it is just a fundamentally different I think scope of change that Jordan Ott's going to be responsible for. Whereas David Adelman and Tuomas Iisalo, they were both assistants. They were already in the organization that they're head coaching now. They already had understanding of the players, some connections. So those are more literal optimizations. I think Jordan Ott, on the other hand, he's really coming in and he has to. I think he's going to have to spend a lot of time actually just building up a new roster, a new culture, a new identity from scratch, because he's coming from the outside. Also, we have to keep in mind that the Phoenix Suns actually had I would say a significant amount of roster turnover this past off season. Kevin Durant is gone, Tyus Jones is gone, Bradley Beal, they're gone. Those are three players that are in the top 8 of minutes played on the Phoenix Suns roster for the 24-25 season, if you take a look at the Phoenix Suns basketball reference page. So you have big holes now in that roster. They're Jordan Knott's going to have to spend time obviously figuring out like what his rotation, what his substitution patterns look like, what his rotations look like now. Bringing in new players, or perhaps organizing players in different roles and responsibilities. They're also bringing in 2 rookies with Kaman Maluak and Rasheed Fleming. So I would expect, more than anything, in terms of what the optimization looks like for Jordan Ott that he's focusing on for this upcoming season. Obviously a big part of what he's focusing on is the development program that Kaman Maluak and Rasheed Fleming are going to undergo playing for the Phoenix Suns. And I'll be candid, like I don't know enough about the details about what he's focusing on or what that staff will focus on or what that will look like per se. But that's just gut feel. Developing those 2 rookies is going to be a big piece of the puzzle for what they're trying to accomplish. And then what? Also, they acquired Jalen Green as well. So that's all. That's another. Not that he's a rookie, but there's a lot of development. There's a lot. There's a lot of rounding out that to Jalen Green's game. That certainly, just thinking about what I saw from him in the playoffs this past season, there's work to be done in his game just to become ideally a much more, call it like a balanced guard on the floor. And that, I suppose also, what that backcourt fit would look like between Jalen Green and Devin Booker. That's a consideration I would expect that Jordan Knott's going to navigate. And ultimately, how do you get the best out of the remaining prime of Devin Booker? It's an interesting phase and an interesting scenario the Phoenix Suns find themselves in right now when you consider, this was an NBA Finals team 4 or 5 years ago now. And in a lot of ways, maybe they don't want to admit it, but, I consider Phoenix Suns to be closer to a rebuilding team than a contending team for sure. So I think there's just ground up building more that's on Jordan Ott's plate versus perhaps optimizing that team. And then finally, let's talk about the New York Knicks. And I live in New York City, so this is geographically near to me. So the Knicks make the interesting choice after they go to the Eastern Conference Final for the first time in 25 years. They decide to fire Tom Thibodeau, their former head coach, and replace him with Mike Brown. And what I would say about Mike Brown, I was really impressed with his first season as a head coach with the Sacramento Kings, because I think what surprised me about that stint, at least how it started off, Mike Brown has a reputation of being a very like solid, reputable defensive coach. That was his focus when he was on Steve Kerr's bench with the Golden State Warriors. Um, the offensive efficiency that he was able to generate out of the light the beam era Kings, that first season just was it opened my eyes. And I say all that to I guess when I think about Mike Brown in terms of what he might be able to optimize with the Knicks, I don't know if it's that same scenario for him. I don't think it's going to be a different challenge for him versus perhaps what he encountered when he stepped into Sacramento Kings, because there probably were no expectations for the Kings when he joined that organization. The New York Knicks, on the other hand, that's the polar opposite. The expectations are sky high for for that organization, but certainly in this city, a good Knicks team is something that's at the forefront of every single New Yorker that is a Knicks fan. I can guarantee you that. So it's going to be interesting because Mike Brown, he's going to be dealing with, like, again, sky high expectations from day one. As soon as he sits down at the podium for media day, his expectations are going to be as high as probably they've been in his career. He's also stepping into a locker room that is very much a veteran team that has a sense of who they are. The roster is largely unchanged from last season. So the biggest thing, or I guess the two things I think about honestly with Mike Brown and the New York Knicks is his time in that locker room, the time he's spending now and for the foreseeable future of this upcoming season, is really what is Mike Brown's plan to win the buy-in of those vets on that roster, top to bottom, not just the stars, not just the Brunsons or Cat or Hart, Bridges or OG. Like, how is he going to win that roster buy-in top to bottom? Because by all accounts and reports, Tom Thibodeau was well regarded by that roster. And off the top of my head, I seem to remember there was a press conference that Jalen Brunson had where he became like borderline insulted when somebody asked if Tom Thibodeau was the right coach for that roster. So I don't think you can discount that. I think that's an intangible that's what I think of with Mike Brown and Knicks, is the intangible of really establishing the relationships. And perhaps, again, I talked about what Mike Brown was able to accomplish offensively with the Sacramento Kings coming in. That might be the thing I'm thinking about initially as well with Mike Brown is there any sort of wrinkle he could bring into the Knicks in terms of like their offensive attack? Because it's a pretty straightforward attack. And sometimes, the saying, "Oh, simplicity is the greatest sophistication." From the outside looking in, you think of the Knicks, their offense is effectively Jalen Brunson pick and roll. And I don't think there's anything to say that's pejorative or knock on that. It works. Jalen Brunson with the ball in his hand is going to generate a lot of scoring and generates a lot of opportunities for the other four guys that are on the court. It will be interesting to see, just if that's still if Mike Brown's going to kind of let that go as is, or is there a different sort of imprint he wants to put onto that offense? So, this was a great question. I want to again shout out to Josh Earl. I really appreciate this question because this was fun. Just thinking about, we have new head coaches coming in. There's coaching carousel changes for the NBA. I think there will be interesting storylines that come out of those four coaches in Denver, in Memphis, in Phoenix, and with the New York Knicks in terms of the impact they make. So thank you again, Josh. Let's go to the next question, again, from Neil. And thank you, Neil, for hopping in the chat also today. Bring that up. So, next question from Neil. Hang out with us in the chat here. Hey Mo, doing the NBA God's work, my man. Neil's question. The NBA, as we all know, has changed to the favor of the outside shot. There are more and more old school players making comment that the game is damaged as a result. There's also been a trend lately of media slash fans and ex-players saying they expect the physicality to return to the game, basketball physicality. Do you think this is a real possibility, or do you think it is a case of the game has progressed too far now? Also, do you feel if the game would be better off as it is, or should Adam Silver try to do something to bring the physical edge back to the game of basketball? Yeah, so thank you again, Neil. I mean, this is a great question, and there's a lot of interesting angles I think you can approach. Like, thinking about this question and even like the answers, because I've been sort of chewing on this one for a few days. I guess let's start first with let's talk about the 3-point shot, because that gets a lot of conversation. And I will say, from my own personal preference, I don't have a problem with the 3-point shot in the NBA today. And here's why I don't. Um it's where the game is today, and it's not going to go away. I think what we see in today's NBA in terms of like the proliferation of that shot and how much is being used, it isn't like a switch flip that just happened over the last few years. I think what we are seeing is, if you think about the history of the 3-point shot in the NBA, the 3-point line has been around, I believe, either since 1979 or 80, and it's taken like 2 or 3 generations for that shot and its place in the NBA game to finally get to this level. I mean, we look back 40 years ago, if there was a player who might have taken like 3 or 4 3-point shots in a game, that was something, that was an outlier thing. And if we think about also, like, think about the players that lean on that shot now. Again, they didn't just start shooting that shot like a year or two ago. We have players that have grown up with the 3-point shot, whereas 20 years ago, I mean, if we think about like even 2005, players who might have been entering the league at that point, they weren't shooting 3-point shots like Steph Curry, because there were no examples of that. There was no coaching or gameplay that emphasized the shot to that extent. I'll say on a top like tier elite level, like you weren't seeing 9, 10 3-point shot attempts from a player or from a team yet in the 90s. It's an evolution of the game, and I understand why it's evolved. The counterpoint or the caveat, I would say, I don't have a problem with the 3-point shot. I think what I have a problem with when I think about the 3-point shot is people who use the 3-point shot without context. Perhaps that might be a problem, and in a lot of ways, I kind of view that as like a evolutionary or a Darwinian kind of thing, where it's like, if a team in the NBA is going to go down the path of they just want to jack up 3-point shots indiscriminately without sort of like a balance to it, I think that gets exposed as you go throughout the season, later into the season. You think about the NBA Finals, where you had both the Oklahoma City and Indiana Pacers, and there's certainly 3-point shooting, like good 3-point shooting on both rosters, but that wasn't really that wasn't the focal point of how they're establishing their offense, and that wasn't what they're leaning on. Both teams made concerted efforts to get to the paint, whether it was obviously Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, or also Pascal Siakam. I thought was like a force of nature and a difference maker for the Pacers in terms of attacking the paint and being a counterbalance to the kind of standard 3-point shooting that we see in the league. So I think the 3-point shot, I understand why people have, if people are like anti 3-point shot, I understand why they have that feeling, because it's foreign perhaps to like basketball examples or basketball aesthetics that you may have saw from previous generations. I just think like there's no turn, like the what's the saying? The genie's out of the bottle on 3-point shooting. I just don't think there's something to like reduce 3-point shooting. It's only going to increase, in my opinion. So from that standpoint, I try not to get too anti 3-point shot about it. I think where I get frustrated about the 3-point shot is if you have a roster where you don't have a lot of reliable shooting, like our Chicago Bulls, and you just see the threes getting jacked up, or it's turning down like buckets there right in front of him. Like, the drive and kick threes, those also frustrate me, I think, a lot. If you have a player that has the advantage, or like in fast breaks, players who get a 2-on-1 advantage and can, take the layup at the rim, but they just kick out for a 3-point shot that, maybe is like a suboptimal 3-point shooter. Those are things that kind of bug me about the 3-point shot. I think the other piece of it, which you mentioned, the physicality, I'll pause for a second. The physicality, I think, is a real thing. I think that is back to a degree. The caveat I think about with the 3-point shot is, I'm sorry, not the 3-point shot, but physicality returning. We definitely saw a lot of physicality in the 2025 NBA playoffs. And actually, this was a conversation point in a previous Narratives Per Possession podcast episode with Chris Steed. What I recall that was interesting from Chris's point of view, if I'm paraphrasing him correctly, is the optics of physicality return. It's not necessarily a more physical league, or like, I don't know if the style of play or the more like brute force type of physicality is on its way back. Certainly where there's hand checking and the way common fouls were called at the rim if like a player is driving in 90s NBA basketball. I don't know if that's necessarily coming back, but the optics of a more physical game showed up from Chris's point of view because playoff basketball is inherently slower pace, a lot more half court. And as I think about your question, the thought that pops into my head is physicality is different now in the NBA because of the 3-point shot. And I think the context of remembering 30 years ago or even earlier than that, it was much more of an inside-outside game where basketball offense used to be initiated in the paint first, and then you would find outside shots from that, where obviously basketball is initiated really in 2025 is advanced as the half-court line, or, a team like the Pacers where they're trying to hit a head pass you relentlessly after a made basket. The pickup point may be from the baseline as soon as the ball's taken out. So it's a different game because it's moving faster. And so I think a faster paced game inherently is going to come at the expense of physicality. It's not going to be a lot of banging as much as we used to see. But I think there can be a balance. And it seems like, at least from the refereeing standpoint, the referees allowed a lot more physical defense and perhaps being more generous with the whistle. So just thinking out loud about that, it's I don't know if we're ever going to see 90s basketball physical play anymore. I think that's gone, but I think my hope is what Adam Silver and what the league saw in this past season's playoffs and the 2025 playoffs, that they're thinking about perhaps in combination with their officiating. Ideally, I know there's like a competition committee and gameplay committee that the league owners have. These are things that hopefully they're discussing, and they're hopefully paying attention to the fan attitudes about what they saw with this past season's playoffs, because they certainly were quick to respond to sort of like, to me, trivial novelty things like, oh, where's the logo on the court? And quickly they come up with silly digital trophies and logos on the court, or all of a sudden just knee-jerk reacting to like, oh, we should have the starting lineup in the broadcast, like all those things. So I guess like the best way I can wrap it all up in summary, I think gameplay, there's just elements of NBA gameplay today where it is what it is at this point. I think there's going to be 3-point shooting for the foreseeable future. I do think that there is at the same time space for physical play to be allowed in the NBA game, because frankly we see it every time we transition from NBA basketball to FIBA basketball. It's one of the things I actually enjoy a lot about FIBA basketball. I'm sure, Neil, you can appreciate that being over in the UK. Anytime you watch European play, it is a much more physical game. That might be the thing, and that might be the solution. If I'm just knee-jerk thinking out loud, I would love to see the NBA game strike a greater balance between sort of like, lack of a better term, the NBA style of play and the NBA style of officiating, and bring in more elements of the FIBA international game as it relates to, I think, giving basketball defense a bit more balance in terms of the competitive advantage, allowing players to play defense. I don't know. That's my biased take on it, but this is a great question. I think it is a question where it may be worth revisiting this throughout the season, because I will be paying attention to how defense is called once we get into preseason, because we saw a lot of physical play, especially like you think about Lou Dort and Jalen Williams, like that, and Alex Caruso, the level of aggression that we saw on perimeter defense. That might very well be the difference too, right? Is so much of defense, again, I think I mentioned this before, like so much defense is happening, the pickup of defense is happening at 3-point line and above. So to me, that's always going to look a bit different than 30 years ago. Defense, again, was really primarily concerned with controlling the paint, attacking or defending in the paint, box outs, aggressive. Back when all teams, like both sides of the ball, like focus on fighting for the rebounds. You don't have as much of that now, because a lot of teams prefer to just give up. If the offensive team prefers to give up the offensive rebound and get back on transition. So there's a lot to explore there for sure. And I think that's a great question. I really appreciate you sharing that today, Neil. So those are our mailbag questions today. And I want to thank both Neil and Josh for contributing to that. And I will use this opportunity again to plug our Patreon community, because that is how you can submit mailbag questions here. If you like what we're doing with this podcast, you've been watching the podcast this summer, please join our Narratives Per Possession community. Is where we have a mailbag you can submit questions to that I read on this podcast. Also, a lot of great written content that's published there. And also make a point of, whether it's our content that we originally create, or, if I see cool content out there, or we have a guest that has cool content, we try to plug that as well. And the goal there is for the Patreon community is to really create like a cool community experience where, we satisfy the mission of connecting basketball fans to better basketball narratives. And ultimately, it's a place where you can come, you can learn something insightful about basketball. You can actually have basketball conversations about real basketball, and not be inundated with bots or trolls. So that's what I'm working. That's the goal. That's the aim I'm striving for with Patreon. And thank you again, Neil. Really appreciate you hopping on this pod. I really appreciate you also submitting your question. I think we can call it a day here. Really appreciate everybody's input. I appreciate all the support that we've had through, I think this is now either a 10th or 11th podcast episode, and we continue to grow. So please do me a favor, subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment in this video, help us grow. It does wonders, and it definitely is helping just grow the reach and grow this community. So that's all I got this time. We will be back with another podcast episode soon, and I hope everybody enjoys their week.